The night air in Seattle carried the cold bite of the Pacific, damp with the smell of wet cedar and diesel. Streetlights hummed and flickered as a battered tan Volkswagen Beetle rolled to a stop beneath their pale glow. It was the early 1970s, and the Pacific Northwest wore two faces, the lingering spirit of hippie idealism and a quiet menace that settled over campuses and neighborhoods like a shadow. In that uneasy stillness, young women began to vanish. They were students and daughters, waitresses and dreamers, each of them bright with possibility until the moment they disappeared. Ted Bundy, born Theodore Robert Cowell in 1946, moved easily through the world as if the darkness inside him were perfectly camouflaged. Raised by his grandparents and told his mother was his sister, he learned early how to hide the truth. To friends and colleagues, Bundy was the picture of ambition, a law student with a charming smile, a volunteer at a crisis hotline, and a young man with political aspirations. His clean-cut looks and easy manners disarmed those around him. No one suspected that behind the warm grin lived a predator who watched women the way a hunter watches prey. Bundy's methods were almost theatrical in their cruelty. He often feigned injury, wearing a sling or a fake cast on his arm, asking for help loading something into his car. His victims, kind and unsuspecting, leaned in to help. By the time they realized the danger, it was too late. Once inside the small Volkswagen, they vanished into the night and never returned. The disappearances began to trouble Seattle in early 1974. On January 31st, 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy, a student at the University of Washington and a local radio announcer, disappeared from her basement bedroom. Her bed was neatly made, but her nightgown was missing. There was no sign of forced entry. Over the next several months, a string of young women followed: Donna Gale Manson, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks, Brenda Ball, and Jorgen Hawkins. They were taken from campuses, quiet streets, and crowded places where no one thought danger lurked. Whispers of fear spread across Washington state as students began to walk in pairs, and doors were locked long before nightfall. On July 14, 1974, Bundy struck in broad daylight. At Lake Sammamish State Park, where hundreds had gathered to enjoy the sun, two women disappeared within hours of each other. Witnesses described a man with an arm in a sling who introduced himself as Ted, asking for help with his sailboat. Janice Ott and Denise Naslund were never seen alive again. For the first time, investigators had a name and a description: a tan Volkswagen Beetle and a man called Ted. Tips flooded in, and one of them identified Ted Bundy. But Bundy was careful and clever. He moved before the net could tighten. He left Washington for Utah, carrying his secret with him. There, in October 1974, 17-year-old Melissa Smith disappeared after leaving her home to visit a friend. Days later, her body was found in the mountains, beaten and strangled. Soon after, 17-year-old Laura Amy met the same fate. The trail of death stretched across the American West: Utah, Colorado, and eventually Florida, each crime scene a grim echo of the last. By 1975, Bundy's luck began to fray. On August 16th, a Utah highway patrolman stopped his tan Volkswagen. Inside, police found an array of disturbing items: a ski mask, a crowbar, an ice pick, and handcuffs. Although these objects were not enough to charge him with murder, they linked him to the attempted kidnapping of Carol DeRange, who had bravely escaped from his grasp months earlier. Bundy was convicted of that kidnapping and sentenced to prison. But captivity could not hold him. In June 1977, Bundy escaped from a Colorado courthouse by leaping from a second-story window during a recess. He was caught 6 days later, only to escape again in December, this time through a hole he had cut in the ceiling of his jail cell. He starved himself to slip through the opening and walked out of the jailhouse into the night. By the time authorities discovered his absence, Bundy was long gone. His final rampage unfolded in Florida. On January 15, 1978, he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. In less than 15 minutes of frenzied violence, Bundy bludgeoned and strangled Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, while attacking two other young women who barely survived. The horror continued 3 weeks later when 12-year-old Kimberly Leach disappeared from her school in Lake City. Her body was found weeks later in a rural area. Bundy A.S. reign of terror ended abruptly in February 1978 when a routine traffic stop in Pensacola revealed a stolen vehicle and a wanted man. By then, the nation knew his name. The handsome law student who once worked at a suicide hotline was unmasked as one of America's most prolific serial killers. In court, Bundy turned his trial into theater. He acted as his own attorney, cross-examining witnesses and smiling for the cameras. At one point, he even proposed marriage to his former girlfriend, Carol Ann Boone, in the middle of the proceedings. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bite marks on Lisa Levy's body matched Bundy's teeth. Eyewitnesses placed him at the scenes. His own arrogance betrayed him. In 1979, a Florida jury found him guilty of the Chi Omega murders and sentenced him to death. Another death sentence followed in 1980 for the murder of Kimberly Leach. For nearly a decade on death row, Bundy played a final, twisted game. He granted interviews in which he alternately denied and confessed to his crimes, feeding the public's fascination while keeping investigators guessing. In his final days, he admitted to killing more than 30 women, though detectives believe the true number will never be known. On the morning of January 24, 1989, at Florida State Prison, Ted Bundy was led to the electric chair. Outside the prison gates, crowds of onlookers cheered as the current surged through his body. The killings had ended, but the unease lingered. Bundy had shown the world how evil could wear a friendly face, how the monster you fear might be the man who smiles as he passes you on a bright afternoon. Even in death, his story remains a warning. The darkest predators are often those who seem the most ordinary. If real true crime stories keep you hooked, hit subscribe so you never miss our next chilling case.